Weapon meta has changed up, and we're actually in a season where nearly all of the weapons are viable picks, but there's still some weapons that clearly outperform the others. So here are the best and worst weapons in Season 20, Split 1. I'll also be ranking these in order of each tier, which I don't typically do. So let's begin. Starting off D tier, we have the P2020. The only reason I'm not putting this weapon in F tier is because digital threats can now only go on pistols and shotguns, of course, with the exception of the care package wingman now. So I guess if you can get one of these guns with hammer points and a digital threat, it's all right. But overall, this weapon without the hammer point hop up just sucks. And I don't want to hear down in the comments about how the P2020 shreds and you absolutely dominate with it. No, stop. Second in D tier is the charge rifle. And ever since the rework, I just never used this weapon. Don't get me wrong, it used to be way too easy to use, but now it's just way too awkward, particularly on controller. And I would literally pick up any other weapon over this thing. First in C tier is the R99. And I know a lot of people are going to be pressed about this one, but frankly, I'm just out here. The gun is ruined now. I can't even keep up with all of the nerfs it's received recently, but I'll try. They've adjusted the recoil pattern, they've nerfed the ammo capacity on all magazines, they've reduced its damage, and then once again this season they adjusted the vertical and horizontal recoil, even further making it more abrupt and harder to use at any range other than really close up. Oh yeah, and they also made laser sights worse, which affects its hipfire. Is C tier too harsh? Probably, but I'm just over it. I'd basically rather have any other SMG this season, and honestly my biggest qualm with this is that they just continue to change the recoil and the mag size. Like, I just don't like that. If you want to nerf the damage, that's fine. If you want to buff the volt or something else so that it competes with the R9, that's cool too. But these two nerfs just make it really bad this season. Second in C tier is the Devotion. The last time I ranked the Devotion in a similar tier, I had someone send me their highlights with the Devotion telling me I'm wrong. Look, if you get this fully kitted, sure, it's a viable pickup, but needing all of these different attachments is a factor here. And on top of that, I'd rather have any other energy weapon or any other LMG over the Devotion. It has the worst hip fire out of any of the LMGs, has the most recoil, and needs time to ramp up. Now, you obviously can obliterate someone with it, but it's just not a gun I go out seeking. Third in C tier is the Triple Take. Now, the Triple Take received no changes this season, but I just think it's kind of in the bottom tier when it comes to the marksman class. It's okay, it can be viable, but it's really inconsistent with its damage. There's times where you're gonna hit for 21, then times where you're gonna hit for like 89. It honestly feels like too much of a gamble, but it can also flex as a shotgun somewhat if you need to use it up close, although no one's probably doing that solely for that purpose. So yeah, I think C tier is right where it belongs for now. And last in C tier is the RE45. And with this gun, if you get the hammer points, it's probably moving up to B tier. And also you can put the digi thread on it, which is sort of like a mini R9. I don't know. But there are definitely times where I use the RE and I'm like, wow, this gun's actually really good and people are sleeping on it. And then there are just games where it feels really underwhelming. It's definitely one of these weapons that if you get it off drop, you might get a couple kills with it and you'll feel pretty good about it. But using it and maintaining it throughout mid to late game, that's when I think it sort of dies down in its power, which makes sense. So I think C tier is fair. Okay, next moving on to B tier, and these are some good weapons, but not great. First in B tier is the Havoc, and I think this is a pretty middle of the road weapon. It's definitely better the closer you are to your enemy, and its effectiveness starts to fall off in the mid-range encounter. So at times it can feel like a funky pick for an AR, especially when you compare it to the other weapons in its class. But overall, this thing can shred up close. So I think B tier on the high end is a very fair placement for it. Second in B tier is the Rampage, and I think the Rampage is a sleeper pick this season. When you charge this up with a thermite, it shreds, and up close, it can serve better than nearly all of the other SMGs. It also can hold its own in the mid-range encounters too, despite its slow fire rate and bizarre recoil patterns. I've inadvertently found myself having a Rampage a lot this season, and it's made me realize how good it actually is. It certainly can be limiting though if it isn't charged up, so that's why I have it in B tier instead of A. Third in B tier is the 3030, and this gun saw a ton of nerfs this season. They nerfed its damage down to 39, previously was 42. They adjusted the ammo capacity in the base and all of the magazines. They reduced the multiplier with the skull piercer. They removed the dual loader. They adjusted the marksman stock. I mean, they did a lot of changes here to try to take it out of the meta. And I think after trying it out a good amount of games, it's still a solid pick, but it's definitely not nearly as good as it was, which sounds rather straightforward, right? B tier feels like a fair placement because you could still use this if you want. It can flex up close somewhat with its hip fire if you need to swap to it in a pinch, but it can definitely still hold its own if you're looking to level up your armor or apply some pressure from the mid-range. Fourth in B tier is the Sentinel, and we didn't see any changes to the Sentinel or any of the snipers in general, but I think it's right in line with where the 3030 is at. You'll just have to decide if you want that better range with the sniper. You're going to get more upside with the damage, but a slower fire rate, less bullets in the magazine, those sort of things. You certainly can charge the Sentinel and hit for some huge amounts, and that can be certainly viable. I do think that the Sentinel is the best sniper on the ground loot, so take that for what you will. But if you're going to use that mid to long range weapon, it'll really just come down to whether you value a marksman or a sniper more. There's no doubt though, the Sentinel is very satisfying to use in Apex. Fifth in B tier is the car, and the car did see a damage nerf last season halfway through the split. I didn't really cover it, but I just don't really know why they did this. I guess they're trying to take away the car and the R9 from being in the meta, but then they released the Prowler back, so it's like a little confusing. Sometimes I feel like they just want one weapon per class to outshine the others. Now you could argue that the damage nerf doesn't significantly impact the car, but I think that it has had slight nerfs over the course of this last year, making it not as good as it has been before. It's just not something I'm going to seek out this season when there are so many other better options at play. Next in B tier is the L-Star, and the L-Star did receive a small nerf this season where they removed barrel stabilizers from being able to go on the weapon. I don't really love this change. It feels like they keep removing barrel stabilizers from so many of the weapons. Obviously they did it to the whole SMG class in the past, and then certain ARs and LMGs, and yeah, I don't know. It's like, can we just like leave the barrel stabilizer on these weapons and then like adjust the weapon in a different way? That would be cool. I think the biggest problem with the L-Star that people have is just how blinding it is. There are times when it's been really strong and then times where it's been really weak. I feel like last season it was in a decent spot. It was definitely upper echelon, but it wasn't so overpowered that everybody was crying for it to get nerfed. I think this is still a viable weapon. It's strong. It's just not going to be as strong, and I still think there are better weapons this season to choose from, so B tier feels fair. Second to last in B tier is the Mozam. This is absolutely a sleeper pick. It's underrated. It can take the digi and hammer points. You get a shotgun bolt on this thing, it's shooting really fast, and it has a high damage output even from mid-range. It's pretty crazy. Not to mention you still get the pistol strafe speed while using the Mozam. It's a great starter weapon, but sort of can flex to the mid game. You're definitely going to lose if you go against somebody with a PK late game, but if you're not, I've done a lot of damage with this thing, and I swear by it being in B tier. Last in B tier is the longbow, and this gun definitely needs a buff. I could honestly put it in C tier if I wanted to, but I'm going to be generous and put it at the bottom of B tier. I know, I'm a nice guy. But I feel like a couple seasons ago, the longbow was hitting for 60, and then they quickly reverted it back to 55. I don't know what they saw that made them have to revert that change. I'd love to see a slight damage increase, but I'd also love to see the bullet velocity speed increase. It feels like the bullet drop off on this is too steep for a sniper rifle, and it honestly feels like it's more of this marksman, but with the penalty of it being in the sniper class. So I don't know. I would love to see it get buffed though. All right, now moving on to A tier. These are some of the best weapons that you're going to want to look out for in season 20. First up is the Mastiff. Now, if you missed out last season, they buffed the Mastiff quite a bit. It's definitely one of the best shotguns for sure. It has a faster fire rate. You can swap quicker to and from it now, especially with a better stock. And this thing is definitely a beast. The reason I'm not ranking it any higher though is still because of its damage output. At times it can be incredibly inconsistent, and also if you do not have a shotgun bolt on it, this thing feels like it takes forever in between shots. However, it's still a really strong weapon this season. Second is going to be the Flatline, and the Flatline received no changes this season, but it remains a staple pick in Apex. It's very strong. The hipfire is pretty good on it, and it can just be an awesome, well-rounded weapon. Third in A tier is the R301. The R301 did receive a slight buff this season. They did improve its hipfire, and this weapon is just a solid all-around assault rifle. It's definitely one of the better options to go with, especially now that its hipfire is improved, and I would say it feels like it's back to how it was, I guess, a year ago when they nerfed all of the assault rifles hip fire. An important note as to why it feels like the R301 is going to return into the weapon meta is really just because some of these other weapons have been nerfed, and making them not as good brings up some of these weapons that don't need a ton of changes to them. I'm going to elaborate on that more in just a moment, but I definitely think we will be seeing a return to the R301 meta slightly. It's not going to be this S tier dominating weapon, but it's much more viable than it has been in the past. And if you're new to Apex, well, this gun is basically everybody's favorite at one time or another. It's just so straightforward. The recoil's easy to handle. It's dynamic, meaning you can use it up close, mid-range, and even some long-range distances. And if you even want to, you can go to the single fire route, but most people don't, and I wouldn't recommend it. So overall, strong pick in season 20. Next in A tier is the Volt. And with the nerfs last season to the R99 and the car, the Volt has reemerged into the meta, currently ranking in the top 2 of the SMG class for me. The Volt is probably the most dynamic SMG right now because it can be used rather well at medium range as well as close range, and energy weapons are pretty strong all around, so finding enough ammo shouldn't be too big of a problem this season. Now, me personally, I'm happy to see the Volt be one of the stronger options in Season 20. Next, I have the G7 Scout, and it's important to note that one of the main reasons why a weapon or even a legend can move up in a ranking without having received any buffs is because it's usually due to its direct competition getting nerfed. There's a ripple effect, so to speak, and with the 30-30 getting several nerfs this season, it's made the G7 Scout a much more viable weapon. This is definitely the best marksman rifle on floor loot right now, and I think you're going to see a lot of Scout spamming in Season 20. Second to last in A tier is the Spitfire, and I definitely have this as a sleeper pick this season. Overall, this gun just feels strong up close and at medium to close range. The barrel stabilizer and the standard stock obviously help with its recoil and its handling. You get a magazine on this thing and you're up to 40 or 50 bullets. This weapon feels like a hybrid pick this season. It could flex as that AR option if you wanted it to, or it could also serve the purpose of like an SMG. Kind of. Not completely, but keep in mind it has a slower fire rate, but not the slowest fire rate in its class. I think this weapon is really strong, and look out for it in Season 20. And lastly, in A tier, I have the Alternator, and I honestly love the Alternator right now. It feels better than the Car and the R9, especially when you get the Disruptor rounds on it. And if you're new to the game, you may like it more too. The Alternator is a slower firing SMG, so that's its biggest weakness, but it can also serve to be an asset in terms of controlling the recoil and hitting more of your shots. This weapon also hasn't seen any damage reduction or nerfs to its magazine size, so I think that also plays into its higher ranking. All right, now we're getting into S tier, the best of the best. Now I'm going to categorize all of the care package weapons together. They're all S tier weapons, and I don't need to spend too much time talking about them. The Kraber and the Bocek didn't receive any nerfs, but these are strong weapons that you do not want to leave behind. But the two weapons I do want to talk about are the newly added EVA 8 and the Wingman. Now the EVA 8 care package version is pretty insane. I actually was gonna put it in A tier, but I asked all of you where you would rank it, and the majority of you voted S tier. The reason I don't love it as much as some other care package S tier weapons in the past is because there are bullet tracers on it now that it has hammer points. There's a lot of muzzle flash that goes with it, and if you aren't in like barrel stuffing range, this gun isn't that good. You need to be very, very close, and I know that sounds rather obvious with it being a shotgun, but all of the other shotguns feel like they can do more in that 15 to 20 feet range. The EVA 8 can shoot much faster, that's no doubt, but when it comes to damage output, I feel like I've killed a lot of people who have had an EVA, and I've had a Peacekeeper. But I'll respect what you guys say, and so I'll put it in S tier for now. And I also wanted to talk about the Wingman because at the beginning of the season, it didn't receive any changes, but Apex quickly nerfed it a couple days into the season due to a lot of the pro players being upset with it. So they reduced the ammo reserve down to 90, which was previously 110. They removed the boosted loader. The optic can no longer be removed, and the optic is also locked on the 1X HCOG. So no more digital threat Wingman. Regardless of these changes, the Wingman is still OP. 95 to the head, 50 to the body, fast fire rate. I mean, yeah, this thing's just a beast. Do not leave this behind. And also, with Lifeline being pretty good this season, you're now able to get your hands on even more care package weapons if you play her and select that upgrade. All right, next in S tier, I have the Nemesis, and this gun has seen a ton of nerfs since it was released in Season 16, almost a year ago now. But man, I have died one too many times to it already this season, and it's left me to just go, okay, this thing is still really, really strong. Doesn't matter that they've nerfed it a bunch. The fact that it's a burst weapon and an energy weapon, I feel like has some crazy mechanic in it that will just obliterate you, especially if you're on white armor and it's early game. Not to mention, you can still use this up close if you find yourself having to swap to it and you need to hip fire it, but it's really, really good. Put a 2x, a 3x, 2 to 4 on it. I mean, you've got a great weapon. And obviously with the ramp up speed, you know, the more you shoot in the magazine, the faster it's going to unload. And this can just go from, you know, cracking someone's armor to downing them really, really quickly. So it's got to be S tier for me. Second is the Prowler, and it did return to the floor loot from the care package. They did adjust it quite a lot, but this thing is a beast. And once again, the burst weapons are dominating. I've also died to the Prowler many, many times this season where it just was like, wow, I got too bursted, and it felt like so quick. Snap of the fingers, I'm dying to the Prowler. Now, where the Prowler lacks is, you know, anything at medium range or longer. It's really more of this niche close range weapon. But in that range, it's got to be one of the best guns in the game right now. Moving down the list in S tier, I also have the Peacekeeper. This to me is still the best shotgun. Between the damage output to how it feels throughout all different tiers, whether you have no bolt, white bolt, so on and so forth, it's very satisfying to use. But I feel like you could get cracked, get down in a fight, and still come back to win it with a Peacekeeper because you're able to hit for 111 or 110, break to some cover, peek back out, pump for 90. The damage output is wild. And for me, I usually look for one every single match. Now, lastly in S tier, I've got the Hemlock. Now, the Hemlock did receive a few nerfs, and what they did was reduce the damage down to 20. It previously was 21. They increased the hipfire spread, which I really don't like that change. I wish they would have left it be. And they made an increase in the spread delay. Overall, this hasn't moved the Hemlock out of the meta, in my opinion. It's still a really strong weapon. It's kind of funny because like a season ago, they buffed this thing, let it go, and then now they're nerfing it again. Sometimes the weapon meta just baffles me. It's like they know they buff a weapon for a season. It's like they want it to just shine for one season and then they quickly take it back. However, as I said, I don't think these changes are going to take it out of the weapon meta. It's still really strong. And as you can tell, these burst weapons will dominate in season 20. They increase the time to kill significantly and they're rather easy to control and use. Let me know what you guys think down below. And if you're interested in the best and worst legends, well, I covered them all in this video here. Thanks so much for watching. Peace.